I work with a team of researchers from all across Canada, an international team, led by Rhys Siemens at the University of Victoria. We're interested, sort of in summary, in the future of reading. What is reading going to look like for most of us 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road? Right now, reading, when you hear someone address the topic, you immediately think of continuous reading. I'm going to sit down with a novel, I'm going to sit down and enjoy several hundred pages of text. But of course, as Teresa Dobson points out at UBC, a lot of people engage in fragmentary reading. You read signs, you read pieces of material. I worked as an undergraduate student with someone who was washing buses with me, and every day when the drivers came in, he would go and sit and talk to the driver. They filled out a kind of a comments card about any problems there'd been with the bus. And over time, I realized he would run from wherever he was so that he had that minute alone with the driver when they came in. And over time, I started to see it was because he was functionally illiterate. He couldn't read the comments that they'd been creating, and the only way for him to do his job was to use this sort of a hack. So it's important that we think of reading in sort of all its variety. Some people would argue the internet has changed what we're doing with reading, but in fact, I think it's always been the case that interaction with text has been an important part of our lives. One of the things that has come up is the question Greg Crane raised in a paper called What to Do with a Million Books. We now have digital texts of vast variety, and some of the tools that we can start to create are things that allow us to deal with multiple books at the same time, more in-depth engagement with individual books as we go. And we have this range of theorists. Franco Moretti talks about distant reading as opposed to close reading. John Unsworth talking about the sort of scholarly primitives that we use to engage with text. And Steve Ramsey proposing an idea that he calls algorithmic criticism, that you will create a set of sort of visualizations. I propose rich prospect visualizations to allow scholars and people generally working with text to look at patterns across text and try to understand themes that are emerging or complex ideas that you can get out of multiple documents at the same time. The principle for rich prospect browsing, there's sort of 7 of them, but what they come down to is show some perspective on an entire collection of documents or on an individual document that consists of a representation of every piece of it, and then you kind of manipulate those pieces. This slide design is an example of rich prospect display because you've got that panel down the left-hand side, and you can see where we are. So we're on slide 4 of 12, and you can see the kind of progress that we're making. One of the visualization tools we've been working on lately is something for visualizing search results. Everybody's used to digital searching, but you sort of think of getting your results and then kind of flipping through them. Instead, you can produce something like bubble lines, designed by Carlos Fiorentino at the University of Alberta, programmed by Alejandro Giacometti at University College London. It allows you to take a document, break it into pieces, or take a collection of documents and do comparative search hits. So this is an 18th century novel by Richardson. Some of you will know the sentimental fiction Clarissa. It's one of the longest novels in our language, over 1 million words. Here we have the first sort of 10 pieces. It's an epistolary novel, so these are letters. And Lovelace is the villain. So we've searched for the term Lovelace, and you can see where he starts to appear at the beginning of the book. Those of you who've read the 1,000,000 words, and those of you who've read the synopses, will know that Clarissa is a tragedy, essentially. It ends with rape and death, and Lovelace is responsible. So what goes wrong? What can you tell at the beginning of the book? My colleague Susan Liepert, again at the University of Alberta, has been working on this question. Here we see, okay, Lovelace, here's where he starts to appear. Click on any of the bubbles on the lines, and you can see the text starts to show up with his name in it. What's happening around the other people? You would expect 18th century, the patriarch is important, and the father would be active at the beginning of the story. In fact, he shows up now as the green line, and you see he's not doing a whole lot in terms of the interactions that are being described in that opening part of the novel. The person who is active is the brother. So we've got a problem. It's the inversion of the patriarchal hierarchy. The brother's taking the role that the father should be taking. So this is an example of the sort of algorithmic criticism that you can start to do by using these sorts of visualizations. What about some of the other figures? Well, the uncle shows up almost as much as the father does. And that's what we can do now. Joanna Ruecker, University College London, refers to this as a symphonics of search. You start to see these lines looking a little bit like musical staves that you can interpret in terms of their sequence. Where are these characters appearing? The problem, of course, is in this version, you're limited to text searching. But in the tool, you can also use encoding. So if you've got richer data, you should be able to get a richer tool. And again, this is some encoding that Susan Liepert has done around emotion. So here we have a search on the XML tag about feeling. The heroine of the novel, Clarissa, where does she report her own emotions? It's in these locations throughout the document. But what's really interesting is when you look at the tag for emotion reported about other people. Somebody is feeling something about somebody else. 18th century philosophy had this idea that if you're a normal, healthy person, you will experience my emotions when you see me have them. There's a kind of a interaction that happens among people. And they formulated a little later as something they called the Aeolian Harp. You know, the wind will vibrate over here and the harp will start to make a noise over there. And they said, people are like that. That's the way human beings interact. And now the neurophilosophers of our day are finding that there's a mechanism for it. Mirror neurons are what they're called. And it's actually true. You know, when you see someone weeping on television, you want to weep along with them. And one of the arguments they made was this is also true in text. If it's why you have emotional reactions to the things that you're reading. You're vibrating in sympathy with these other people. So this is an example here. There's a lot more social emotion going on. And there's even more emotion where people are engaging in social emotion by showing it to other people. So the green lines now are showing us reports of somebody feeling something about somebody else. The red lines are where they're showing it. You can start to see there's something really happening down towards letters 6 and 7 and 8. They're really getting into an emotional moment together. And it's true. This is a part of the book where the characters are describing, why is Clarissa not interested in this other man? What's going on with Lovelace? She must be in love with him because she's rejecting this other suitor. And in fact, that's not the case, but that's the interactions that the family are having at the time. In addition to visualizations across chapters of books or across, those could be short stories or multiple collections that we're using with bubble lines, we also have some things we've been working on with one book. You think of visualizations with one book and you think of people like Joanna Ruecker or Stephanie Pasevic and some of the beautiful work that they've done on artist books and visualizations around text that are kind of one-offs. But we're producing interactive prototypes. And we've had an idea that you should be able to apply really to any digital book. It's called the dynamic table of contexts. The idea here, you've got a panel on the side that is essentially your standard table of contents with chapter headings. Beside it, you've got the markup of the book. So someone's gone in here and they've marked all the people's names, they've marked all the locations, and when you click on one of those, it opens up inside the table of contents as an interactive tool. So there you see all the names of cities that are mentioned. When you click on one of those, it takes you to the location inside the book and calls up a little panel underneath. And finally, we take the bubble lines idea and add it in. So now you've not only got an interactive table of contents, you've also got this search result showing as a kind of again, symphonics of search within the novel that you're looking at. New affordances, we call them, new opportunities for action in working with digital text. Finally, we have another tool that's been built by Alejandro Giacometti while he was with me at the University of Alberta, and it's visualization for collection browsing. Here we have about 100 bloggers. We run an event at the University of Alberta called the Day of Digital Humanities. And once a year, people from the international community spend the day blogging, and they find out by that means what it's like to be a person working in computing in the arts. What does it mean to be a professor or a graduate student or just somebody interested in working with humanities, materials, and computing. So if you self-identify as a digital humanist, you can go and blog and become a part of this annual event. So here we have the names of all of these people, and with the little panel on the side, you can add and subtract things from the tiles that represent the bloggers. So there I've just added the organization name that they come from, and now I'm about to add the city. And then in the next panel, you can click and group by those things. So I'm kind of browsing through, who do I want to read? Well, now I've grouped my bloggers by the city that they come from. I start to think, well, that's interesting, but maybe not so useful, so I turn that off. And now I'm going to group by the organization that they're affiliated with. What university are they at? And here we see, okay, here's the group of a variety of universities, and I'll select the subset that are from my university, University of Alberta, and it strips those out into a collection, reduces the others into a set across the bottom, so they're not really lost, they're just diminished on the screen. And then I can call up a text reading panel. And I think my clicker has stopped clicking. And maybe that's a good point for me to stop too.